Sometimes the only thing that we're consistent at is being inconsistent. I'm Coach Eric. This is Sane Enough. I can't stand being inconsistent. I can't stand when the people around me are inconsistent. Sound familiar? Feel familiar? Hit a little close to home? Of course. No matter what, no matter how free a spirit you are, inconsistency will grind on you. You expect better of yourself. You hope for better for those around you. And if you let it, it'll drive you nuts. So, how do we stay sane enough in this inconsistent world? Well, a couple of ways. First of all, we got to dive deeper onto consistency itself. We have to understand the difference between consistency and persistence, because consistency and persistence are often utilized, the verbiage anyway, as being interchangeable, but they're not. They're very different things that sometimes feel the same. And I think most importantly, we have to go ahead and acknowledge that inconsistency is irritating. It is. It's a common frustration. No matter how free you are, no matter how forgiving you are, no matter how comfortable being late you are, there is a point at which inconsistency is frustrating for you, and I guarantee you've witnessed it be frustrating to the people around you. Now, I can tell you, I have a close friend, and I used being late as an example because this just happened. Okay, he is never on time for anything. I mean, never. The only thing consistent about him is that if you don't tell him to be there 15 or 20 minutes ahead of when you really want him there, he'll still be half an hour late. So that's what we do. We say, we're going to meet at 5:15. We're going to meet at 5:30. But we're going to say 5:15, right? And we know he's going to show up sometime between 5:30 and 5:45. He's consistent, but he's tardy, right? What ends up happening is sometimes he shows up closer to 6 o'clock. Because while late is a consistent status for him, that 15-minute grace period we give him is not consistently enough. And recently, we were all meeting over at a local restaurant, and he showed up on time, and none of us were there. He got there. We said 5:15. We all meant 5:30. He got there 10 after. Good God, was he heated. I mean, so heated. And it's like, all right, well, you're very inconsistent in when you show up. And you always think it's just cool. No big deal. But today, not only were you going to be on time, but you're early. Now you're irritated with us. Why? Well, because it's frustrating. It's frustrating. Timeliness is frustrating. Consistency is frustrating. There's a ton of things in this world that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis that can be consistent or persistent or just plain old irritating. And we have to find ways to manage it. So we have to acknowledge that, right? Once we've acknowledged that, then we can state what the problem is. Well, the problem is you're not consistently on time. In fact, you're not even consistent with how late you are. Usually it's 15 minutes, but sometimes it's half an hour. So what we have to do is set a goal, a strong goal, and then we have to go at it with a strong purpose, right? Because if we don't do that, we'll lose momentum. So in this case, we're talking about timeliness, right? What's something you can do? Well, what I teach my kids when they're doing laundry is to set a timer on their phones. Why? Well, because they can't or don't hear the laundry machine when it beeps. So then their laundry sits there forever. And the next person either has to finish the person ahead of them's laundry or wait them out. Now, I know that you know how frustrating that has to be. And if, like myself, you ever lived in an apartment where you had to go to a laundromat and you walked in there and one dude is using 6 machines and is left and they're all just sitting there full, you know that frustration at an entirely different level. So what can you do? Well, you set that strong goal. When you put the clothes in the laundry, you set an alarm. When we make a dinner plan, you set it in your calendar with a reminder so that it dings on your phone when you have time to leave for it. So if it's 20 minutes to get to the restaurant, put it in as a 5:15 alarm, but put it in as a 5 o'clock alarm. Whatever you think you're going to need to be able to leave in time to be there by 5:30, because that's when we said we were going to be there, right? So you set your technology up to help you, and then you follow through with it. And you have to do that from the word go, because if you don't, you will lose momentum, and then you'll be back to being consistently inconsistent. Now, does that make you a bad person? No. It's critical to understand this. I cannot stress this enough. Whether you are a consistent person, whether you are an inconsistent person, whether you're an on-time person, whether you are a late person, whether you're the guy who's inconsiderate or you're considerate, right? Inconsistency is not a moral failing. It's not. Intentional negative behavior is a moral failing. But inconsistency, lapses, are not moral failings. You have to look at those, and you've heard this a million times, but I'm going to say it again. You have to look at those as learning opportunities. They are part of the process. You're going to fail. You're going to be late. You're going to be inconsistent. You're going to be inconsiderate. You're going to have lapses. They don't make you a morally poor person unless you have poor morals. And poor morals are having these negative actions as your intent. If you intend to be morally absent, you are morally absent. If you intend to do the right thing and you fail, you have an opportunity to learn and step up. That does not affect your morality. Okay, I know I've stressed that about 3 times in 3 different ways there, but it's really important to understand, because nothing kicks in shame like feeling like you're morally in a moral vacuum, like you're morally absent, whether like you're a bad person. You hit up episode 5 if you want to know why I'm so big on not letting shame take hold. So you have to understand, routines are important. They are, because they help you stay consistent. But in a lot of ways, those routines are themselves an illusion. And they create an illusion of consistency. So then why do I think routines are important? Well, routines are part of the process that'll help you get better and improve. They're just not 100% accurate, and that's why there's an illusion to them. You feel like that is your routine, right? It keeps you grounded. Possibly, it's an important part of your identity. We all know the person who is always 15 minutes early to everything. They identify themselves as that person. And that routine of always being early is part of how they identify with themselves and how they project themselves out there to the world. And that makes them feel more comfortable, right? There's a sense of security to that. You know, if you go to bed at night, let's go directly to security here. If you go to bed at night and always walk around to every single external door in your house and check the locks to make sure they're locked. You open up the door to the garage and check to make sure those garage doors are down. Maybe even flick the light to make sure that it's off. And then you lock up and you go to bed. If you do that every single night, it makes you feel safe. It makes you feel secure. You know your house is locked up. It's quite literally about safety and security, right? What happens the night you forget to check the sliding door? You lay down, you kiss your significant other, or if you're flying solo, you tuck yourself in, and you stare at the ceiling and go, did I check the sliding door? Was it cracked open? Was it locked? I don't think I checked it. Oh, it'll be fine. I'm just going to lay here and I'm going to think about it. And you're so uncomfortable, you can't fall asleep because your routine is to always check. And this time something distracted you. You're really tired. Maybe you didn't feel well. Maybe you just had a lapse. And you didn't check the backsliding door. Or maybe you did, and you're not 100% sure you did. You missed your routine. And now you're uncomfortable. Why? Because when you break your routine, it's unsettling. It was a security blanket for you. You're always comfortable when you show up 15 minutes early. When you only show up 5 minutes early and you're still the first one there, but you feel like you should have been there 10 minutes earlier, you're uncomfortable. The first time you show up 5 minutes late, you're devastated. It's not actually the end of the world. It may not even be a big deal that anyone notices, except for you, because you broke routine. And as a result of breaking routine, you sabotaged something that you consider part of your identity, or you broke that safety net, that security blanket, that comfortable feeling. And so that routine, which is not in the grand scheme of things vital, is important to you because it affects your mental performance as you move forward, right? And so as you look at this, you start to understand that the concept of consistent is all about being steady, right? It's about doing the same thing, the same way, the same timing, that sameness, that steadiness. That's consistency, right? Persistence is closely related, and that's coming back repeatedly. If you always check the doors before you go to bed, but then you go back 3 times and check that back door, you've gone from consistent to persistent, right? You're going over and over and over again. And you have to understand that while we strive for consistency, it's often unrealistic. It's an ideal. It's something that the complexities of life are going to get in the way of, right? And it can lead to things with neurodiversity that can throw some extra kinks in that armor, right? So consistency is generally good. Routines are generally good. But like so many other things, you have to be aware of when the good starts to wear into bad. And usually there's some neutrality in the middle. But it's hard to catch it before it gets to a place where shame and some of the other voices in your head start using that routine as a weapon against you, as opposed to something to make you more comfortable. Now, persistence, on the other hand, persistence is already comfortable with the fact that there's going to be setbacks. It's inevitable, right? So what persistence says is go check, go check, go check, go check. Let's be on time. Let's be on time. Let's be on time. Let's be early. Let's be early. Let's be early. It's not perfect. And it often isn't of itself a leader into issues that you're going to have to deal with that become obsessive, right? Persistency can lead to obsession, but it's a much more compassionate pattern than obsessing about routine, right? Because there's flexibility built into persistence. The timing isn't quite so concrete. So when we talk consistent, I want you to think about it like a machine. I don't mean just any machine. I mean like a perfect functioning machine. It does the same task in the same way, the same timing or intervals, and it does not fail. It doesn't fail. It's a machine. That's consistency. It's the metronome. Tick, 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 tick. That's a machine. We can all imagine that in our minds, right? So if that's how you feel your life has to be run, that you must have a strict adherence, that you're never, ever allowed to be late, that you can never, ever miss a workout, that you have to always follow your meal plan, the calorie intake, the timing, because it's part of what you have perceived to be your identity or your routine or critical to your journey, that unwavering adherence, let's be real, it's not sustainable. It's a great ideal. It's a great goal, but it's not sustainable. So let's take just a little breath here and let's think of a time when you might try to put in one of these routines that you start feeling is critical. And I think the morning routine is a great way to look at it. So you aim to get up every morning. Instead of being up at 6:30, you're going to get up at 6 a.m. every morning, right? And you're going to meditate for 20 minutes. It can be visualization. It could be Zen. It could be future self. Whatever it is, your meditation, because this is part of your process. This is what you're going to do. And it's going great, right? You do it all week. This is amazing. I feel so energized. I thought getting up a half hour early, I'd need coffee immediately. Instead, this routine, I'm a meditator. I'm awesome. Until this following Tuesday when my kid's sick. Nothing worse. I'm sitting there meditating. I hear, we know that sound, right? So get up, go upstairs, go downstairs, wherever it is you need to go. And you find your beautiful baby child head first in the porcelain. Well, now your whole morning is screwed up, right? So you've had to cancel some things. You had to move some things around. And so tomorrow you wake up 6 a.m. But because of yesterday's adventure, you had to move some meetings around and you got to get to work early. You don't have time to meditate because you had to move everything up half an hour. You could have gotten up at 5:30, but that's pushing it. 6 a.m., get out the door, let's go, right? And then you just kind of look back at that. It's like, were you consistent? I mean, it wasn't perfect. You broke the routine. Now the answer is going to be, you're consistent if on Thursday you get back at it now that you've made up your time. But if you let outside forces or internal forces interfere, they break that routine. And I'm going to give you an example. It just happened. You don't know it happened because for a rare time on this show, I went ahead and stopped my recording. I don't like to do that. I like to work through the stumbles and the bumbles. Unfortunately, I had forgotten one of the key parts of my own personal routine, and that is to put my phone on silent or the very least vibrate, right? Well, I didn't do that, and one of my framers is working on a job for me, and we're building a house, so I got to get over there here soon. And he just sent me a text, and then realizing he sent the wrong person the text, sent me a follow-up text saying, "Oh, sorry, that was meant for Ozzy." So my phone exploded twice in the middle of me talking about things breaking your routine. And not only did it sidetrack my thoughts, but it's an unpleasant listening experience for you to hear that go off in the background in the middle of me telling you something. So I stopped. I texted, put my phone on vibrate because I know he's going to text me again and I need to hear it. And I acknowledged the fact that I screwed up. I screwed up the flow on this show about screwing up consistency. And it's just such beautiful irony. And that's the way the world works. I'm telling you how to be consistent and how to deal with consistencies and how to deal with inconsistencies. And I blew up my own routine. So let's get back at it. Would love to say it's not going to happen again, folks, but then we wouldn't be talking about reality. So persistence. It's about the act of returning even after disruption. So I am not consistent today. I'm not. I have screwed up my phone. Thus, I had to stop the show, had to do some things. Now I'm back. I am being persistent. I can't do my routine today. I cannot be consistent. I blew that already, but I am all about getting back to work. I'm about persistence. So think about persistence Not only in the terms of what I just did, which is a really better example than what I wrote here, but we're going to read what I wrote anyway. I want you to think of it like a river carving its way through a rock. Man, that's so deep, right? In dry years, the river moves slower, so it moves less dirt, does less carving. In wet years, it hauls, right? But whether it's a fast year, a slow year, a dry year, a wet year, a frozen year, it's always coming back to do the job. It is persistent. It may not be consistent because there's so many variables to determine the velocity of that water, the depth of that water, the temperature of that water. There's too many variables for consistency, but it is persistent. I think about, I had a buddy who was a mountain climber. I mean, he's still a mountain climber. I haven't talked to him in a few years. He moved out of the States. Anyway, so he's a climber. And he'll get in his rig, get in his harness, and he'll start the climb. He's never going to free climb first. He's going to have to do it in a rig first. Why? Because he knows until he masters the face of that rock, he runs the risk of falling. And it's not a will it happen situation. It's gonna happen situation. He's gonna fall. And so he has the choice, right? Embrace that and be persistent and get back on the rock and climb. Or let the fact that every time he climbs, he's now screwed up his routine, defeat him. So he gets back on the rock and he keeps going, right? He lets the harness and rig catch him every time he falls and then gets back on the rock. Persistence is about the intention to continue, even when the execution is flawed. You don't have to be flawless to be persistent. In fact, the glory of persistence is you're not flawless. Go ahead and accept that immediately, and let's get back to work. So we'll rewind back to our story. 7 o'clock comes around and you didn't get to meditate today and it's beating you up a little bit. Well, you can stop meditating because you got up at 6 today and you didn't meditate, or you overslept your alarm and you didn't get up till 6:30, and you're looking at the wall and it's 7 a.m. and it's too late to meditate now because you got to get the kids on the bus and you got to get to work. So you can beat yourself up over that. You can accept that the routine is a failure and never do it again. Or you can be persistent and understand, had a lapse, bummer dude, tomorrow, 6 a.m., we're right back at it. That's the big difference, right? Consistency is looking for that flawless execution. It's looking for that structured routine, that perfect calendar, right? And persistence is saying, this is the real world. It's dynamic. Things are going to change, okay? Consistency is static. Persistence is dynamic. Consistency embraces routine in stringent terms. Persistence understands that it is a process and that you have to engage in the process and celebrate the successes to really enjoy progress, right? So, consistency, it's a goal. Persistence, it is a strategy for achieving the goal, or at least getting as close as you can, with the understanding that the real world is going to stick its nose in it and ruin things for you. It's the understanding that progress is not always linear, but through repeated effort and a little self-love, a little self-forgiveness, a little workshopping, you can be consistent. You can be successful. You can be persistent. You just can't beat yourself up over those lapses, right? So a key to that, once you've got that, 30,000 feet under your belt and you get the idea, is to understand that streaks are a construct, right? They're a myth. Nobody is perfect forever. Nature is inconsistent. So you have to understand that there's a difference between a lofty goal and reality. And so when you set the goal and you break the streak, right? You've gone 7, 8, 9, 10 days in a row of meditating, and now you've had the porcelain incident. You've broken the streak. And that's going to make you, in your mind, feel like a failure. Because you broke the streak, and breaking the streak is a failure. But that loss of consistency is not a sign that you are weak. It's not a sign that you lack commitment. It's not a sign that you lack willpower unless you're unwilling to restart, right? That's the key, isn't it? It's getting back at it is really where the willpower comes into play. It's really where the strength comes into play, because the real world will stop you from doing things consistently. Streaks will end. They always end. You can't play in every single baseball game of your career. Cal Ripken sure tried. Fantastic streak. It had to come to an end. And that is what you have to understand with streaks. And when you do break it, you cannot look at it as a failure. It is a failure if what you're telling yourself is you have to have a perfect streak. But if you take the realistic look of, I want to have a perfect streak, but I understand I'm going to have failure points, then you can take those failure points, because that's what they are, they're points, they're data points. And you just identify them as such. This failure was a data point. And within that data point, I can identify the obstacles, the physical, the mental, the timing, the porcelain. And then I can understand my own behavior within the context of those obstacles, right? And that's critical, because if you understand your behavior and you understand the obstacle, then you can game plan not only for getting back into action, but for avoiding that specific problem in the future. And it improves not only your recovery this time around, but it actually makes you stronger in your routine moving forward. So what feels negative is a net positive because you've improved the routine overall. And that's why mindset is so critical for productivity, because you can take something and view it as a failure and beat yourself up over it. Or you can view it as a data set for improvement and end up stronger for having failed than you were when you were on a hot streak. And that's where talking to yourself really makes a big difference. That's where the voices really matter. If you're giving in to the negative voices and letting them pound on you, instead of pushing back, instead of negotiating, instead of explaining to yourself, hey, I got this, I'm good enough at this, I just made a mistake, then you're letting yourself fall into that shame and blame cycle. And it's dangerous. It's a dangerous cycle. And I'm not going to dialogue on that for the next 30 minutes. I've already done that. If you haven't heard it, check out episode 5. It's an in-depth discussion about the shame and blame cycle and how destructive it really is. But in a nutshell, shame beats up your mental health, and thus it hurts your performance and it grinds your progress to a halt. And once it does that, shame makes it way, way easier to quit and to stop than to get back up. And soon as you're down, shame's going to kick you. It's going to tag in its buddy blame. And now it's going to be everybody else's fault. It's going to be your own fault. And you're going to isolate yourself and beat yourself up. And what was supposed to be a great routine will have a lapse in it that completely implodes the entire process for yourself. So check out episode 5, Shame and Blame. Get a little more in depth on that, but understand how important that is to understanding why you're consistently inconsistent and how you can frame that to be a positive instead of a negative. Okay, so you've got the grasp on shame and blame. Hopefully you didn't need to go back and listen to the episode because you already did, but if you didn't, stopping here and going back and listening would be a really good idea before you continue on for the last little bit that we've got here. But let's talk about the day after. The day after. That's where the true test is. You've had a lapse, and you want to know, am I inconsistent? Am I a problem? Am I failing? Or am I going to succeed? Well, you're going to find that out not in the moment of the lapse, but in the moment where you have to make the decision of whether or not you're going to continue. So using our same look at that, stumble, bumble, lost my train of thought. The measure of success is, do you start back up again after you stumble and bumble, or do you just turn off the recording and say, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. No. So you go back. We're talking about the meditating at 6 a.m. You go back the next day at 6 a.m. and you meditate, right? Now, yesterday's lapse is no longer a failure. Yesterday's lapse is a realization that in that moment, you couldn't get it done. But today you can. You can analyze that data set as to why you failed and work forward from there for a stronger you, right? It's the difference between self-criticism, which we talked about a lot on Shame and Blame, versus self-encouragement or self-analyzing. If you are self-criticizing, you're beating yourself up. If you're self-encouraging, you're building yourself up. And if you're self-analyzing, you're evaluating the situation to make yourself better and to train yourself, to be your own coach. So you have to understand then, and you have to embrace the fact that these lapses, they're part of your process. They're not a derailment of your progress. They are just one step in the bigger picture. And it's not fun, but you have to welcome that friction as part of growth and understand that you won't build without it. And part of that is embracing the present moment. There's a lot of power in understanding that this moment is the moment I can affect. I can't do anything about yesterday. It's over. I can't even do anything about 15 minutes ago. I cannot roll back the clock to when my phone went off and keep that from happening in my life. I can't. It broke my train of thought. I had to stop the recording. I had to go back and delete it. I can eliminate it from your life because you're listening in the future, but I couldn't eliminate it from my own life. But if I embrace the power of the moment and I do what I can do, then I can make it better for what we're dealing with. And what's critical is that I'm prepared to restart in every moment, right? Because the importance is moving forward, not looking back. So every moment I have to be ready to start again. You have to be persistent. And what you have to make sure you're doing is looking forward, but focusing now, staying in that moment. Because if you get too focused on the future, now you're starting to involve some negatives again, right? You start to distract yourself from the moment you're in now, and you start to make it even more critical. And by critical, I mean you're starting to put pressure on the moment you have now. And when you do that, you raise the stakes and you put a ton of pressure on yourself in the moment. And we all know what happens if you have too much pressure in the moment. You run the risk of failure that feels like choking, right? We've all felt like that. We've all choked in the big moment. And part of what leads to that is the concept of perfection. But some of that is also being too forward thinking. And I know that sounds crazy because isn't all of this about getting better in the future? It is. But you have to embrace the now and focus on the now to work towards the future. Keep the future in mind. Keep the future in sight. Keep the now in focus and embrace the power of the present moment. So earlier we talked a lot about routines in a negative light. And I don't mean to imply that they're negative. They can be negative. Like so many other things, when they're tied to the need for perfection, routines become negative. When routines are something that is so critical to your identity that you have a little break every time you have a lapse in one of those routines, they can be negative. But the truth is, routines are also comforting. Routines are also a part of your security portfolio. They make you feel safe. They make you feel productive. Routines can increase your productivity and your mental performance by giving you bite-sized targets. The role of a routine, as far as its positive effects on your mental performance, are all about how you frame not the routine itself, but the lapses in the routine, and how persistent you are at getting back into the routine. So routines are good. They're not just the negative. In fact, they're mostly positive. But like so many things in life, the little voices in your head and the voice in this podcast spends a lot of time hammering negatives, right? So you have to get in to the mode of understanding that the negative is only a moment. It's only a moment. Just like the positive was only a moment. And when those moments lapse, you can start again. And you can get back at it. And you can be persistent. And you can make that routine part of your journey. You can make that routine part of your process. You can make that routine a tool towards progress instead of a key part of your identity. And in that process, you can cultivate persistence. And that persistence is going to give you that sense of consistency. Because it is key to consistency in a world where you are not actually a 100% flawless machine. Because even machines aren't flawless. They need maintenance cycles. They need downtime. They need someone to feed them material. Even the concept of a machine that we used earlier, that 100% flawless, well-timed, well-oiled, well-functioning machine, it's not actually going to be perfect. It's going to break down. It's going to have off product if it's fed off material, right? And I keep saying right to you because I want you to question it. I want you to think about it. I'm trying to give you some pauses where you can be like, how does that apply to me? Well, it applies to you if you evaluate your moment and you evaluate your bounce back moments, your day after a lapse, your moment after a lapse, your opportunity to be persistent in the lapse of consistent. And you can't beat yourself up in that moment. You're going to. I know you're going to. You know you're going to. That's part of human nature. It's one of the voices just hammering at you. It might be shame. It might be blame. It might be negative Nancy. There's all kinds of opportunities in there for them to be mad at you. But you have to be resilient. You have to focus on those motivational tools that you're building in your toolbox. And you have to be persistent. That willingness to fail, turn that failure into a data set to analyze, and then embrace the opportunity to use that data set for progress. To show yourself a little self-kindness, a little self-compassion, to forgive yourself for the failure and embrace the idea that that failure is going to make you stronger for next time. You cannot embrace the shame and blame game. We've talked about that. It is not only counterproductive, but it is truly destructive behavior. So, what can you do then? If I'm telling you all these things you can't do, if I did an entire episode on the shame and blame that you're not allowed to do, what can you do? Well, first and foremost, you need to embrace the small, actionable step, the reasonable goal. It's not weakness to look at a problem and say, I really want to get way over there, but if I can get 10 steps towards it, I'll be closer. You want to run a marathon? First, you got to run a mile. You want to run a mile? First, you got to go 40 yards. You want to go 40 yards? You got to take that first step. We understand that when it comes to physical motion. We don't have teleportation. We don't always understand that when it comes to goal setting with mental performance in mind. So, embrace the small actionable steps and then focus on the process. Don't become overwhelmed with outcome, because outcomes are results. Process is progress, and it can take different forms. We've talked about taking a step back, taking a step sideways, taking a detour around a problem, working through the problem, working over the problem, working under the problem, right? Beating the problem into submission. All of those things can happen on your not so straight path that you've drawn for yourself. So what you have to do is say, hey, you know what? I know when we did workflows, we drew a straight line. I know when we did kebabs, we drew a straight line. I know my timeline on that piece of paper that I look at is a straight line. When I visualize the path to my future self, it's a straight line. I visualize it that way. But I am compassionate enough with myself to understand that I'm going to fail and that I'm going to have to take detours. And I'm going to have to step sideways. And those are moments that I can analyze instead of critique, because I can turn those into data sets that are going to give me the information I need to go forward in a better way. So, embrace process, progress, adjustments, work, kindness, forgiveness, and tell shame and blame to shut up. Shut it down. You don't need them. They're just noise. You're going to stumble, and when you do, you're going to get back up, and you're going to do it again because you are persistent. How can you work on that? What tools do you have? Well, you have a lot of tools already. I know you do. But you can work on some of those relaxation exercises, your visualizations, your breathing exercises. You can work on your future self. You know, just because the timeline isn't a straight line in real life doesn't mean it isn't helpful to do a workflow in a straight line, to identify your goals, to identify your risk factors, to talk to your future self and have your future self tell you how you got there. All those things are going to be helpful. You can meditate. We talked a lot about that in this episode as a theoretical scenario, not because it's not a valuable tool, because it is a valuable tool. Meditation is good. And meditation comes in many different forms. It's not just crisscross applesauce and humming. There's a lot of ways to meditate. You can listen to music. I love the power of music to put you in a meditative-like state and where you can really relax and let things go and use your mind to open up and embrace the process, to work on your progress, right? You can listen to a podcast. I know one. Hint, hint, maybe this one. Maybe recommend it to friends and then talk about it together. Challenge each other with concepts from the show. Learn what each other picked up from it, because what you learned from it and what they learned from it are going to be different things. Make fun of some of my mistakes. It's all right. I can take it. I'm a big boy. And if you're not sure who else you can talk to about it, hit me up. Go to intracognism.com. Make a comment on this post. Embrace the idea that having a community to work with is also part of your forward strategy, right? So, big picture, what does all of this mean? Inconsistency is natural. We all strive to be consistent, but inconsistency is part of the process. And if you handle it correctly, It's part of the progress. Embrace those obstacles. They're part of your journey. And when you overcome them, celebrate the effort it took to overcome them. Don't belittle yourself for having had to overcome them in the first place. Every new moment on your journey is a key moment on your journey, because it's when you've taken the time, when you've put in the effort to prove to yourself that you can be persistent in pursuing your goals. Celebrate progress. Embrace the process. I'm Coach Eric. This has been Sane Enough. Appreciate you joining me today, and I look forward to talking to you next time.
Silence, a hollow space, a heavy weight, no saving grace. I've gone cold like ash and rain. Nothing remains, just empty pain. No more reaching, no more try, just a slow, quiet goodbye. Another day, same gray skies, searching for truth, telling remember whispers burning bright, a hopeful world bathed in light. Now just echoes fading out, a hollow ache, a silent shout. I've gone cold like ash and rain. Nothing remains, just empty pain. No more reaching, no more try, just a slow, quiet goodbye. Hands are tired, cold despair. Tried to keep it safe and sound, but dreams they vanish when left unbound. Slipped away like smoke in the air, lost in nowhere, staring out there. Gone cold like ash and rain. Nothing remains, just empty pain. No more reaching, no more try, just a slow, quiet goodbye. Like broken glass, nothing remains, just what did pass. No more reaching, no more climb, just acceptance, the end of time.
That was Atomic Phonographs with Should I Try? Thank you for joining us on Sane Enough. I'm Coach Eric. Have a good one.